Just stop it. The run-of-the-mill, cheesy, humdrum bullshit status quo just tires me out. What fascinates me are the industry disruptors, the superhuman frontiersmen or women who go through hell to achieve their goals. Join me as we meet and learn from those mavericks, rebels, and business leaders that aren't afraid to piss off the establishment in order to make radical change for good. Sponsored by Johto PR, the disruptive anti-PR firm that murders your competition with cinder blocks and cyanide. This is Disruption Interruption. Hello. So today's guest, let me tell you about him. He's definitely a disruptor, a bit bizarre because he is the nicest disruptor I've ever met, nicest leader, but he is a progressive leader and growth catalyst. He's an experienced CEO and mentor with a demonstrated history of rapidly scaling companies in the med tech industry, or medical device industry, I should say. He's skilled in medical devices, healthcare information technology, and he's got a strong focus in marketing strategy from Cornell University. I don't think all of those things fit together, but he makes them fit together. He's a medical industry veteran. He's a paradigm shifting device innovator. How do you like that?
That's good.
Yeah.
You know if I use that?
Yeah, he's a nationally recognized mentor. He is the CEO of InfoBionic, Stuart Long. Welcome, Stuart.
Thank you. And wow, I'm glad we're recording this.
I know, right?
Welcome to hear somebody say that. It's on record finally.
Paradigm shifting device innovator.
That's great. Yeah. Thank you for that. That's very nice of you.
Yes. So we have you on the show because you are a disruptive badass. And the very first question we always ask our guests, right, is, disruption is all about going against the status quo. When did you say, that's fucking it, no more?
Yeah,
I'm changing this.
Yeah, I'm a person that has never taken the normal path. I've kind of sought the different paths, but I kind of got stuck in corporate life, working for large scale companies, and it was after one too many assholes of a manager or line of management that my like moment when I had had enough of how companies are run and why it has to be a particular way. And I heard a great person told me directly that we were talking about this. They felt similar to me, and they said, "Yeah, what did the color of my socks have to do with my performance?" And that resonated with me. And I realized that I'm going to go run a company, and I'm going to run it anti-status quo, which was when you had me at anti-status quo when I saw your on the website. So because I was fed up with PR firms too, right? It was just everything status quo, run it a particular way. And
that asshole-ish mentality is in that industry too. I mean, it's throughout corporate America, right? So I'm glad
it runs rampant. And they seem to get promoted and and more well regarded. I don't think that's the case so much anymore, but we test for that actually. Yeah, we actually test for it. And I think maybe in terms of kind of where the age of the market, in terms of the people coming into the market, into the professional world, it's far less about being tolerant of that, whereas historically it might have been a little bit more. But yeah, we actually test for that. We actually we do analysis by roles that we hire, and we look for a lot of psychological criteria for people that are maybe overly dominant and they don't listen. If you put a lot of these, we have a coach that walks us through that and says, nope, that one's an asshole. Just keep going.
Really? Oh my gosh, this is great. You have an asshole barometer.
Yeah, exactly. So
it's actually
it was
skill.
when I was tired of corporate America and made the decision, that I'm going to fundamentally change how a company's run, how and we've got unlimited vacation rules and a whole bunch of great rules in terms of anti-status quo. And it's actually kind of entertaining when people come into the company and they're not used to that, and they'll be like, hey, next Thursday I need to take off at 1 and go to the doctor, and I'm like, I don't care. You stop explaining.
As long as you produce, right? You get the job done.
It's what we call a ROWE, ROWE, results only work environment. So you can do whatever you want, whenever you want, from wherever you want, as long as the work gets done in a role model way, right? And so that kind of mitigates the asshole component. Because I'll never forget, I was and one more. I fired my best sales rep. I have a question on that. Just before we were acquired by a private equity company, I had to call them up and say, look, I just fired the #1 producing guy because he was an asshole. And they're like, we trust your judgment, right? So, it was a little shaky going through it, but we ended up being better because of it. So,
right. Well, you obviously have a no asshole rule in your company, which works. Do you think that has everything to do? That's a disruption in itself. Do you think that has everything to do with being disruptive in your own market? Is that you have to have a disruptive culture or it's not going to work?
Oh, absolutely. I think so part of, we came out with a technology that's incredibly innovative. We've got a model that's very disruptive, which obviously part of the reason we're talking. But if you stifle an organization, to say that, you're measured by how many meetings you have, how booked your calendar is, who comes in first, who stays the latest, those are not things that matter to getting the work done, right? And if you value ideas and creativity and openness, and we do employee engagement surveys. I've been doing these now for 7 years.
Yeah.
And
you actually like them?
Amazing, because you learn so much from your employees, right? Completely anonymous. We trademarked our culture. We call it TACIT, which means it's implied, right? And so if you look for these hallmarks of employees, and I'll tell you what TACIT stands for. If you look for these hallmarks in people, race, religion, or creed, doesn't matter. If they have these hallmarks, you don't have to worry about your culture. Your culture does itself.
Wow.
So it's TACIT. It's trust, accountability, creativity, innovation, and transparency. Wow. And it's bookended by trust and transparency. And if
have you trademarked this?
We have, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So if we can, we'll trust you with your time and what you do with it until the point where you prove that we can't trust you anymore. So it's up to you. It's your responsibility.
Like an honor system. Yeah.
Exactly right. And what's interesting is when people aren't kind of following those rules, nobody has to tell. It's a kind of a peer measurement system. So the peers will kind of lean in and say, hey, I need you to step up and carry somebody else's backpack. Yeah, it is. It is. And so
because I think people are more afraid of their peers' viewpoint of them than they are their managers at times.
Right. And so part of that, part of that culture, not only do we do engagement, we, as a matter of fact, we've measured extremely engaged, which we're in the top 5% of all companies in terms of our engagement, every quarter running since I've been here, and my last company as well. And that goes from listening to your employees. And so, that creativity and innovation of TACIT is creativity is not being afraid, the psychological safety to speak up in a meeting and call out your manager or disagree with your CEO, to have that constructive, ability to be able to have those conversations. But creativity is thinking it up, and innovation is putting it into action. So whether it's a finance person coming up with a better way to do billing and AR, or it's somebody going, hey, maybe we need to repackage this thing because it'll work better, or a sales rep coming up with a better way to sell. I mean, it runs across. It's not just R&D people and marketing people coming up.
It runs the gamut.
Exactly. So
you probably give people a lot of creativity and innovation in areas that normally don't get it. You give them the ability to express that.
Well, we challenge them with it, right? So we task people to do this, right? So we follow a system called objectives and key results. We use a software platform that measures what we call OKRs. And so every year I set the top level of OKRs in a consensus with the group. So we all agree on what those are going to be, typically around people, product, dollars, customers, things like that. And then each manager on the management team will set up their objectives that align to the company goals. And then each of their employees all set up their individual goals to align to the top level goal. So top to bottom, everybody is aligned completely and motivated to work together on things that really matter. And so we do weekly check-ins where
and that's your transparency.
That's full transparency. Yeah,
that
absolutely.
So
or it's being, hey, look, I'm gonna, I hired a new guy and he's like, hey, is it okay? He's from, a different country. I'm going to go home can I work from there for 3 months? We're like, absolutely. Another guy just bought 2 more houses in 2 different locations and wants to, live, full-time, outside of where we hired him. And, it was like, absolutely. Right. Cause I don't want geography to be the boundary that limits me from capability. Right. So it's whoever is the best person. Right. And so we, in addition to kind of all of those things, what really makes it gel is we do a review process that's a peer review, 360 degree, right? So my entire staff reviews me. We get some of the peers get some of their peers to review them rather than just top up, bottom down, and everybody sees what everybody gets. So it's really interesting, and so we found that was the employees really valued it because they got really honest feedback. Everybody,
and they could actually see what peer said what. That's
Yeah,
good.
absolutely.
That's
Yeah, and they get to
that's so much better than it, like
what they
something
do is
hidden.
a manager can assign a peer, or you can allow the employee to pick their peer. So they don't, so you're not picking somebody who knows going to give them a good review. Right?
Yeah.
So, and it's pretty funny because all those systems were two different companies, the engagement and the OKRs and the review, and they ended up, one acquired the other one, so it ended up working out in our favor. So
Wow.
we've got it down to one company. So yeah, so we're just full on I think disruption capability within the organization to think that way, think about failure as the biggest success, right? If we're successful, we're going to get complacent, and in complacency, I can see it from a mile away. Entitlement, well, it just doesn't exist here because we're really rigorous about making sure that we're constantly in a state of change, questioning everything, right? Anti-status quo. It's our company. We can't build it without people.
You've had to be because I want you to tell me how you got into InfoBionic, but there's been trouble in adoption of this, even though it's becoming widely accepted now, right?
Right. Yeah.
But tell me this no asshole culture and always in the mindset of change and status quo, and how you got into where you're doing, like the disruption that you're doing now.
Yeah. Well, I accidentally got into disruption on the kind of the job front. I've always been kind of anti-status quo. I was always, challenging my parents on why do we do it this way, kind of thing. But it kind of goes back. I took a different route on education, even though I was accepted into medical school right out of high school. I got talked out of it by my mom and a physician that, I would have been 23 years old. And
they talked you out of it?
They did, only because I would have been pretty young, and they said the pressure of being 23 and a full-fledged doctor. They said, hey,
you would have hated
school, test out after 2 years, and then go. And so I did that, and I had way too much fun for a couple of years, but I certainly enjoyed it. But my mom was a home health nurse. She ran a big nursing home later, and I got used to going on home health visits. I still have a rock collection from one of her patients from back when I was a kid. I mean,
no way.
She bagged him and wrote on him. It was just it's an amazing thing. But I learned the humility of healthcare because of patients being cared for in the home and nursing homes. And in high school I became a certified nurse's aide. I volunteered at nursing homes. So I've always kind of had an altruistic motive, but none of my friends did that. Right? They were definitely thinking about that kind of thing. So when push came to shove, if you went
the medical route, like the medical school route, I don't think you would have gotten that humility training.
No, I think they train the opposite, right?
Yeah.
And so, looking back, I wouldn't have changed the thing, right? If you look at lifestyle and payback on the loans and all that kind of stuff, my ROI is way higher, my quality of life is way better.
Right.
Not to take anything away from physicians, there might, we sell to doctors.
Not for you though.
Yeah. So what that did is it led me through kind of a non-traditional route in education. So I still got lots of schooling in, but, I went, the kind of the technical school, went to an X-ray, got through CT. I kept asking, what's the progression? Cause I've always been, I do one thing, what's the next thing? And so all of them were, well, hey, you can get into management in the hospital. There's lots of avenues. And I'll never forget one day I was working in the hospital and some guy was walking down the hallway in the radiology department. He's carrying like 6 boxes of pizza and wearing a tie. I'm thinking, I said, who's that guy? And they're like, oh, that's the Kodak rep. And I'm like, I want that job, right? Because when I was a kid, right, my dad came home in a new car. He's an accountant. Worked for H&R Block a long time ago, self-employed forever today now. But I came home in a new car and I got in and I was like, wow, this is really cool to smell the whole thing. And I'm like, hey, Dad, what job makes the most money? And he point blank said sales. And Absolutely. So it was that moment. And then watching that guy walk down the hall of pizzas, where I was like, that's it. I want to go into sales. And I ended up I went to work for a company, and lo and behold, because the Kodak reps had a picture of their picture on their card. And what I didn't know about a vision board, and I didn't used to write things down then, was I wanted my picture on a Kodak card. So I ended up going to work for a very disruptive cardiology company. Long story to get to your point, where we actually were, so medical images, in radiology, typically were film, static image, 2D, look at it, hang it up on light. I started out in cardiology because I went to echocardiography school. I graduated, went directly into a management position, implemented a first of kind technology about recording cardiology not from videotape, but doing digital loops. And this was a company that had disrupted the whole field of how to record cardiac images.
How?
So what they do is they created a computer. Then instead of a VCR built into the ultrasound machine, it was a digital hard drive that did the recording. But you had to do really just short snippets because when you recorded, it was pretty sizable file. And back then, a terabyte of storage was about $1 million. You can buy it for $60, $70 today. Yeah, wow. I mean it's on your thumb drives, right? I mean, a terabyte. Yeah. So now we talk petabytes and blah blah blah, right? So that was my first foray in crossing over from the clinical side into the business world. And I started out as somebody who would go out and train the customers how to use this. And I, when I got it, I was like, well, you guys are totally messed up on how you're training this, because I came from that world. And so again, I was very creative and trying to already start to change how things were done. And I was like, I want to go into sales the whole time. Do you have a sales job for me? And finally put me into sales. Great story. My very first sales call, went to the deal, did a demo at 7 o'clock at night for a doctor. And he asked me for a discount. I'm like, I call my boss. I'm like, hey, can I give a discount? And they're like, absolutely. So I said, yeah. And I said, but you have to give me the check. And so my first sales call ever, I closed it and walked out with the check in my hand.
That's awesome.
So I knew I was born to do it.
I'm hooked.
Well, in my initials are actually SEL. So I think I was truly born to do it. So then that led into radiology or more disruption. So I went to work for same thing. We were making digital, going from film to digital. So I was involved with these two major shifts in medical imaging and radiology and cardiology. So kind of my core areas of expertise. Right. Ultimately, that went into using a web browser to do medical imaging, when back in the day, it was, no, you need a dedicated workstation with our custom software and ... And nobody ever thought, web-based applications would fly. And we were the first ones to be doing it in medical imaging. Later, that turned into, I got into the insulin dosing space, because overdosing in insulin in the hospitals, it's the third most dangerous drug to dose.
Is it still that way?
It is, yes.
Wow.
And so they still follow, most every institution follows a paper protocol that was built in the 30s. And, it's 90% of the time it's wrong. And nurses don't follow it, or there's residual insulin.
Too much human error.
Yeah, whether there's extra insulin that was left in the IV line, or, some bodies, people that have different body tissue types, and it lives in the interstitial tissues. And so you would end up chasing somebody's blood sugar to keep bringing it down, dosing, and then you overdose them. And then that falls into a category of greater than 40% of the time you die. So we had a piece of software that actually did the calculations and would predict this residual insulin, how much was there. And so it would cause a big change to lower how you dose insulin, but it stopped the overdosing.
Yeah.
So very disruptive, 25 PubMed papers, but only the market growing at 1% or so. It's really hard to get physicians to change behavior, right? I saw a great comic once where guys at a lectern and full of doctors, and the guy says, who loves innovation? Everybody raises their hand. He's like, who wants to do it? Nobody raised their hand, right?
That's what you're experiencing.
Yes, yeah, and it's been that way, since I got in. That's why I say I kind of accidentally got in, but I've constantly been changing how technologists, clinicians, and physicians, clinicians being physicians, assistants, masters of nursing, and so on, of changing workflow and big changes, right? Because doctors are trained, they're so specialized, they get in a habit of doing, and I'll just kind of paraphrase it, but it's like 3 to 5 things repetitively over and over again, because time, speed, efficiency, mouse click counts, we call mouse miles. Please don't put a cancel button on this screen and put it on that side of the screen on the next screen. It's got to, I want to push a button and see the image in sub-second. I don't want to wait, 10 seconds. So all of that, really, really mattered over time. So all the way fast forward now out to InfoBionic. So
you've got disruption, and you've learned to sell, right?
Yes, constant. Yeah. And I've learned that there's a scale about disruption, that there's parts of disruption that are nearly impossible to get adoption, to your point about adoption, to it's still difficult, but it's not going to be as hard. And when I came to, or when InfoBionic called, the kind of testing that we do, it's been around since the 60s. So it wasn't anything new. We were just changing how you had access to the information. We were simplifying it greatly. Not to mention, it was the first product I'd ever worked with that actually had reimbursement. So I'd always been involved with trying to change hearts and minds just because it was a better idea and it was more convenience, and there was really no ROI. So, but when they knocked on my door, one, it was close to my heart. It was non-invasive cardiology. I knew all about it. I kind of left radiology and cardiology to go into insulin, which I knew nothing about, which was a great learning, and how it all connects now back to the heart. And the idea that we were improving care dramatically, because typically the way the systems work in the market is there's you wear it. Yeah, sometimes you go to your doctor, he gives you to a third party. It takes like almost 5-7 days by the time you finally get it on, if you get it on, and then you have to wear it.
What are you wearing exactly? So our listeners.
It's looks like a recording device, and it'll have some wires, and you attach it to it. And I've seen duct tape, I've seen saran wrap going around this thing. Just really innovative ways to try to wear some of these older type devices. It's improved a lot. Now they try to communicate to your cell phone, which is inherently has some challenges. But the point being is that you wear it for however long it's been prescribed. And the rules are that, if you're ordering a 30-day test, which tends to reimburse more money, you need to make the device available for 30 days. And typically they'll make you wear it for 30 days, even though you might have had your problem on day 2. But in some cases, the devices aren't communicating enough information, or they're not communicating often enough, or they don't communicate at all. So you might have had an event, missed it, you don't know what you're missing, and then the test ends at 30 days, and then you got to mail it back, and it goes to a third-party queue, where it's kind of called a cube farm, where techs are sitting around, and it's in the queue. They get it, plug it in a computer. The device picks off what it thinks is important. Those techs review it, narrow it even more down to a single piece of paper on a PDF, and then store probably a limited amount of time, but the rest of that data gets trashed. So they throw away about 99% of the data.
And then it gets back to the cardiologist.
Yeah, and still using fax machines, believe it or not. But it's more vogue now. You get a PDF file, and integrating it into the EMR is more common. But in the outpatient world, where it's in a doctor's offices, it's a lot less common. So you still literally see the fax machines and the PDF. But depending on the
literally still a fax machine.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Tell me about this process, because we haven't even talked about how this disruption occurred yet, but how long does that take? This antiquated process?
Depending on there's tests that can be ordered for 2 days. You can order a test for 14 days, and that needs to be available in case you don't find something until day 14. Then you need to continue monitoring for up to 30 days.
Afterwards, it goes to the cube. It goes through the queue, and the technicians. How long does that take?
Kind of on average, it's by the time you put somebody on order the test to the time you get your end of the results, it's about a 4-week process. When there's one test it's a 2-day test, so it wouldn't take as long. But even in that world, we have personal experience with our employees trying to put their kids on on these things, and even though it's a 2-day test, they didn't get the results for 2 weeks. So there's still this kind of, if you just think about the supply chain on your medical data, the device to acquire it comes, remotely from a third party, not from your doctor. The third party has to work with your doctor to figure out your insurance coverage. Does the third party actually have coverage for your insurance? Do they have contracts? And then once they acquire that data, their third party gets it. They got to figure out how to get it over to the doctor. Instead of sending it electronically, it's usually a PDF file. So it's this massive, what we call clinical compression. Back when you did videotape, you recorded 45 minutes of scanning a person's heart, but the doctor only saw 2 or 3 minutes,
right?
Because it was
up to the job. And that's the 2 or 3 minutes that the technician decided was the most important, and the rest of the 99% gets trashed.
And and there's two compounding problems. Is one, you got to have really good techs, and 2 is the technology itself has to be really good, because sometimes the lead will pop off, and if your device isn't communicating, then the patient may not notice it until they wake up, and maybe they were off lead for 8 hours. But then it might say, well, you were in a particular arrhythmia for a specific amount of time, and that specific amount of time generates a certain kind of treatment. But if it was false because one of the leads was off, you weren't really monitoring. So it's really hard for a physician. Then I've got this piece of paper, and I noticed that there's no signal for 8 hours or 12 hours here, but it says that your burden was this percentage or whatever. That doesn't make any sense. So now I've got to call the third party, which is generally like, I'm not going to do it. I have my staff do it. It's a series of handoffs, press 1, press 2, finally get somebody on the phone. Hey, we need to look at the data from whatever date. And they're like, we don't have it, or we do have it, and we'll get that over to you. And meanwhile, the patient's gone. they have 15 minutes with their patient, right? So,
oh my gosh.
So it's a what I just call it's a supply chain issue that like it's when FedEx solved overnight delivery,
right?
And how UPS has solved that in terms of kind of their supply chain. So fundamentally different is, we have a cloud-based solution. We have a little device that basically has, wires that attach to it, and it streams the data off of you in near real time, actually as fast as it'll come off. And about from the time that it acquires it, goes to the cloud, gets processed, gets QC'd to make sure it is what it's supposed to be, and then back to a physician is about 3 minutes.
So you do a quality control test to take out the false positives or the false negatives or whatever, right?
Or just plain artifact,
or just,
wires jiggling around. And so there's AI that does that, but then we also have a human that verifies a step past that.
We have a manual oversight.
We do, right? But in the way we do it, we require far fewer people to be able to do those things.
Yeah,
considering the
in
traditional
far fewer time.
Yeah, exactly.
And it goes directly to the cardiologist in his practice or in the ER.
Or anywhere anybody who's credentialed to see that data, and it does it in near real time, and it sends 100% of the heartbeat. So you're not getting a PDF looking at just the event. You're looking at an event, and you can play it back and watch it scroll by as if you're sitting in the hospital with a telemetry monitor watching this go by, and you can go, this is a 15-second pause, your heart stops beating. Let me look at the onset, look at the offset. Or you had a run of tachycardia that was pretty severe that started and went for an hour. You're going to get a snippet of that on a PDF file, where now I can go back an hour and 3 minutes and look at what was happening before it started.
Yeah, that's got to be revolutionary. And I can look at it
for after.
I mean, I know it's revolutionary, but it's got to be to these cardiologists.
Yeah, and so that's not even the disruptive part, right? So that's innovative, right?
Okay.
And so
what's the disruption?
It's pretty cool. So the disruptive part is we changed the who has control, right? So right now the third party has control because they do the work, right? So when you get your blood drawn, right? So you go to your doctor's office, you're in the hospital.
Lab.
You go, well, yeah, or you go to they either draw it and send it out to the lab, or you actually go to the lab.
Yeah, or you have to go to the lab.
It's a third party, right?
Yep.
They call them independent diagnostic testing facilities. It
right.
doesn't matter if you do blood, or you're doing behavioral health, or you're doing cardiac monitoring reporting. So they're all third party service providers, and that's a name that the government or CMS gave to institutions.
Okay.
So the idea is that we have, so the lion's share of the reimbursement, because the way the reimbursement works is the doctor gets what's called a professional fee. They're the professional. They order the test and they get the result.
Okay.
And they get a fee for doing that. Okay. Now, the people who do the work bill what's called for the technical fee. So the techs are doing all of that, and that's generally the lion's share. And in our world, we concentrate on the longer term monitoring, more complex cases. That figures about $700 for the technical part and about $27 for the doctor. So the doctor is billing $27, and the third party is taking 95% of those reimbursement. And in some cases, that's okay for the doctors because they don't want to deal with it. Maybe they're one doctor, they don't have enough volume, it doesn't make sense to own it. But for the most part, when a doctor is able to do two things. One is take on a vastly improved clinical system, to be able to have a telemetry style system, non-emergency system for detecting arrhythmias. And then also, because they own it and they're doing the technical work, they actually can bill for this technical fee. So it's a pretty substantial change for them. And that's the disruptive part. So we have fundamentally disrupted an entire market, and we're moving the money away from the third-party vendors, and we're giving it all to the providers. And that's the disruptive part, because now and that's been the hard part, to get people to actually believe in it.
Because disruption gets rid of, it changes the value network. It gets rid of some part of that value equation that's been there before.
Exactly. And when I heard that our co-founder, who's a guy named Dr. Jeremy Ruskin, and he founded the first electrophysiology lab where you do catheter ablations and put in pacemakers and things like that. Distinguished physician at Harvard.
He's another badass.
He actually wrote the book on it, literally wrote the book on it. But his point, he had an OF moment, right? Where he's like, this has to change. I can't take it with multiple vendors, multiple reports, multiple logins, faxes over here, PDFs over here, different devices for every kind of test. There has to be a way to change, right? And so when I learned about why the company was founded and the ability to improve care so dramatically, because we've done a study. We cut, we studied AFib, which is like the #1 arrhythmia in the world. We cut diagnosis from, diagnosing in 7 to 8 days down to less than 3 days, 2.95 days. And that was a 3-year retrospective on all published data. So 100% faster. We give 100% of the data and 100% of the heartbeats. So we took innovation and we deployed it in a way that completely disrupts the market. And it's been hard, right? We thought we'd just sit by the fax machine and take orders, and it's hand-to-hand combat on every one of these because it's so ingrained. It's been this way for decades.
So part of your biggest challenge is acceptance. And you would have thought, I mean, okay, well, first of all, the thing that ding, ding, ding for me that I don't even know if our listeners caught, but you've cut out the third party, which I want to talk about that in a minute. But now the reimbursement goes to the physicians. That's got to be what is that increase in revenue for them? Like percentage wise, just on average?
It's a 25 to 30-fold increase.
So instantaneous.
Yeah, the first use of the device. Yeah.
And so you thought you're going to be sitting by the fax machine or getting calls or whatever, getting all these orders, right? But that hasn't been the case.
No,
quite the opposite.
Because you're asking somebody to change how they do their work. And when I go back to my scale now of disruption, so we're using AI and algorithms, and that was the easier part to get to people to accept that we're going to do a bunch of the work on the AI side to make your job more efficient. They accepted that right out of the gates. Whereas in insulin, an endocrinologist is like, I am not going to let a computer tell me how to dose insulin, period, end. Not going to happen. Two totally different ends of the spectrum. Yeah.
They're like, forget it.
And so the idea that the physicians have to do more work, right? And that's the thing. Now I'll temper that with, we've done a really great job with the use of the software and how to do inventory management and order the tests, seamless EMR integration, and how to do the hookups. The device is, it's really simple. There's a button on the front that you can push if you want to. In many cases, for the patient, you don't have to do anything. I mean, the best thing you can do is you don't have to push the button. Docs like for the button push because they like to know that the patient was feeling something when the AI picks out something and does that. All told, we make the front end, that what we call the front end of the front office, much more efficient, because the people that were doing all the work with the third party, exchanging information, insurance information, pre-authorization, getting maybe potentially one kind of the test we do mostly, you get a daily report. Techs have to take that in, ingest it, make sure, do we tell the doctor right away? How does that all work? Get time with the doctor. They stop doing all of that. And then, so they're not sharing the patient, the insurance information anymore. And they're doing all that work in-house. And, it's infinitely more efficient. So we increase the efficiency on the front office. The docs will spend more time because they actually now have to stop and do the interpretation. Now, it may sound like a foreign concept, but if you've got a cardiac CT scanner, or you're doing echocardiography, or if you're doing a stress test on a treadmill, and you're a cardiologist, you're already doing that. You're already doing the interpretation of the reports. You're sitting down in a little windowless office somewhere and pulling up the studies and dictating into a microphone, and you're doing that work already. So we're not asking them to do anything completely out of the normal, but you would think we were pulling out their fingernails, because in some cases,
so it's not really even the front office thing that was the main issue for them. It's just they're having to now read and evaluate this, whereas before maybe it was less time for them. I don't know.
Far less time, because they wrote a prescription and a report showed up. And that just became, the thing is there's a, in healthcare, deeply embedded habitual patterns, and people, they just don't want to pull up the corner of the rug because they don't want to find out what's under the rug.
Yeah. But the corner of the rug underneath it is a shit show.
Yeah.
Right?
And the
and really affecting patient care.
Exactly. Yeah. And they didn't, it's again, you don't know in those systems, you don't know what you're missing in terms of things that are occurring around the events. And we've kind of changed all that. So we've had to change and reorient how people look at it. The other thing is when you refer out to a third party, you don't pay any money. You just get the test, and everybody makes money by billing the insurance company. So the doctor gets his 27 bucks. He's happy, gets the test done, gets a report. He's done it. That's the status quo, right? Been that way forever and a day. And I'm like, oh my God, I love this anti-status quo. We're going to rip it up. We're going to change it. And everybody's going to buy it. And we're going to, we'll be a $1 billion company by the end of the year. Let's see. And it's October, right? And we're 5 years in, and we're doing amazing, right? But we, but our system, you have to buy it. You have to own it. So we're asking somebody to go from a system where they've never spent a dime. They don't realize that they're losing money. You have to demonstrate the fact that, hey, you're only getting 27 bucks, but did you know your front office is actually, spending this much money of their expense time dealing with a third party? And then you turn around and ask them to pay tens of thousands of dollars for inventory. And the first thing is, well, how many more people do I need to hire? And, the point is, the system is pretty efficient. If you're not a huge customer, you can get by with understaffed because we do work shifting. When you get into, hundreds of devices, you start to have a staff, but then you realize the economic benefit of that, it becomes, it helps your organization. And it was really helpful during the pandemic, right? Because people stopped going to the offices and they were able to mail the devices
and these
out.
cardiology offices, practices were shut down. They weren't considered essential. Is that right?
So it wasn't that they weren't considered. I mean, it was just that people stopped going, the elective procedures in hospitals, and then the semi-elective stopped. But patients were like, hey, I'm not going to go to my appointment because of COVID, and I don't, and they just stopped, and employees were getting sick, so they had to close the offices.
They can monitor them, telehealth. This is basically
and now that's
telemedicine,
where we found our center. So
and you kept many offices alive during the pandemic.
We did, in fact, and so we were able to. Terrible that the pandemic hit. What it forced, though, was the government to sit up in its chair and say, we have to react to being able to allow physicians to continue to practice care, right? And if you would have asked me in, December of 2019, would doctors be running telehealth systems and doing, video consults at 80% of their patient volumes? And
we would have said, hell no.
Fully reimbursed and patients fully covered.
Yeah.
We would have all been going, hey, what are you smoking, right? So, but COVID actually from our industry, it was a time warp. It shot us forward 10 years. And we came out on this other side, and all of a sudden, the telehealth market was kind of sitting around used to the way the market was reacting to the market's behaving. They're overwhelmed, right? Couldn't keep up, right? We had customers that were running backup telehealth systems, freeware. If this one fails, we use this one, because it would be too busy. And what happened was
that's a good problem to have.
Yeah. And so we put together a quick program that allowed us to get devices into the patient's homes from the offices. Doctors were able to run telehealth visits, get reimbursed at the full rates of office visits. Patients didn't have to be concerned about, were their insurance going to cover it. And they were able to look at their telemetry signal in monitoring while they're having the patient on the phone. And it turned out that they were able to treat their patients dramatically better. And I've done a few telehealth visits as well, and my doctor's never late. They're always on time.
They're never late. I know, it's
true. And so
I think after the pandemic, going to the doctor or having telehealth has been so much better because I never have to wait. They're always on time. Even if I go to the doctor, the protocols are in. They're so worried about getting everything correct that I get in and get out, right?
Right. Yeah. I do all my paperwork. They're very explicit about the instructions. They've already seen it. If I need to send a picture of my sore thumb, I click a picture.
We don't want you waiting.
Exactly.
Yes.
But it was the same thing, right? There was even a paper published, like, where did all the heart attacks go? Because people just stopped going to the doctor, and that was dangerous, right? People are like, okay, I'm not going to go. So from that perspective, we're purpose built to be in the home. That's our job. And we not only have a great clinical solution and a great, innovation on the supply chain of your medical data. Not only did we shift, and disrupt the market in terms of being able for physicians to have control and have what we call, economic ownership, and the benefits to go alongside of that, but we were able to improve care dramatically because of the quality of the signal that we have in our device. And we ended up winning a deal with the Mayo Clinic, and they went out and did an exhaustive search in the industry. They looked at all the vendors, And when they found out about us and we got further along with them, they're like, we'd never even heard of you guys, right? And so, because we're still pretty new, right? And so, come to find out that, they were looking at, we were at our R&D offices, and we had kind of a little, device timeline of all the devices our R&D group has developed over the last 30 years. And the doctors were like, oh, I remember this device. That was then, like, you guys built that? I mean, it was, so it lent a lot of credence to, we got some real smart minds that are behind this. And it's no wonder the adoption took off once people start to understand the model. And simultaneous to the Mayo Clinic, we struck a deal with the largest independent cardiology group in the US. When I say independent, that means they're not owned by a hospital. So, we made great strides there during the pandemic. We had great, use cases. You guys were there with us on that. And, 80-year-old woman at home, they, giving her medicine, it wasn't working. And we were watching her heart rate, watching her heart from remote, helping her out. And when it was time to get people to the hospital, we didn't send them to the emergency room, bad place to be, admit them directly into a safe place, do a procedure, right? And so, when you have experiences like that, where you are able to improve care dramatically, you get a signal quality that isn't normal. It's disruptive in itself in a remote care setting. And then you've got the economic element, where we finally gotten to our point where we've hit our stride, and the mindset has shifted. And I'll go one more to say that we recently just launched the website with a group called the Mayo Clinic Cardiovascular Services, and Mayo Clinic will actually provide the IDTF services with our product, similar to what most of our competition does. So what we've done is we've not only have
this ability, force to be reckoned with now.
Yeah,
right?
We've not only had the ability to enable the provider to use the device for themselves, but we've enabled the provider now to go to market and be the first provider ever to provide these services on a national scale. And it's always resonated with Dr. Ruskin's original idea was he wanted to get this into the hands of the providers.
What does that mean? The first time a provider can offer this on a national scale, like paint that picture for me.
So right now, in terms of these tests, I'll name the tests, may not mean anything, but I'll kind of explain them. There's what we call a 2-day Holter test. This is a test you wear for 24 to 48 hours. Because of the limited amount of time, roughly 80% of the time, it's non-diagnostic, meaning you didn't find anything. So typically then they'll go, okay, we want to do another test, bring the patient back in, put on a different device. That's a 14 to 30-day test. And, there's how that works. So with our device, we can, still do that 2-day Holter, but we also, rather than having a different device to do an event or a mobile cardiac telemetry or what we call now extended Holter, our device does all of those. In fact, our device only does one kind of monitoring. It does telemetry, and it's just a different kind of report that we produce based on whatever kind of coverage that the facilities have. So what we mean by the first provider, Mayo Clinic is the first hospital or healthcare suite of personnel that are going to go to market and provide this service to other hospitals instead of a business, a vendor, or a third party. So they're the first ones to do it, and they chose us as their vendor, not only for their own internal studies, but as their partner to go forward on this initiative. And we're, we couldn't be more excited.
Wow. Well, okay. So you've got this disruption. Now you've gotten this education barrier that you've had to overcome, but then the pandemic forced people's hands to actually have to confront it, right? So now you're winning on that, and you have the Mayo Clinic, right? Who have you pissed off? Because anytime there's disruption, and okay, were the third parties pissed off? I mean, anytime this happens, there is that part of the market or the market share that shifts, and people get really pissed.
Yeah. Well, so there were some vendors in the space that had a history of litigation against their competitors as a strategy, and that's not uncommon. It's unfortunate, but I think that, as you defined it, one of our competitors, one of the biggest ones in the industry, qualifies for that, and they went after us very early on, going back to 2015, and we're really persistent and have been, for the last 6 years.
And when you say competitor, it's like like the third party vendor type competitor that like is shutting
third party
out.
vendor, yeah.
So that would be a competitor.
They were the industry leader, billion-dollar company.
Right.
They were just recently acquired for almost $3 billion. So, definitely, somebody, because we're an existential threat to the industry. Now, I think I personally was a little naive in the beginning to think that we were going to wipe out the entire IDTF industry because, now 5 years in, I realized there's a
think that you might have pissed somebody off during that.
Yes. Well, I fully expected it, right? And I love being an ankle biter. I love it when people call me an ankle biter because,
you're a Chihuahua.
And I know you guys.
That's what Chihuahuas did back in the day.
Yeah, they were badass little dogs, right?
Yeah, they were. What was it, the Incas or whatever? They used them to like go after and bite the ankles of their enemies. Like,
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
no.
in math,
I love the analogy. Yeah.
Yeah, I learned this when I was in Peru, right? So
now I know what an actual ankle biter is. That's awesome.
Now you know. Yes.
That's
so
great.
It's not just one. Think of thousands of Chihuahuas coming at you. So anyway,
yes.
you're a Chihuahua.
Yeah. So I love to, back, I remember I had a guy I worked with, and then he went to one of my competitors and he's like, you're an ankle biter. And I took, he was at, I think 20% share, and I took 18% of his share away. At one point. So, I just love that ability to, kind of start and grow and create, and that kind of falls into the disruption. But yeah, we sufficiently, and I think we only made them more angry because we won every single assertion, for the last 6 years. In litigation. Yeah, in court, it's all public. And, we're at the tail end of kind of wrapping all this stuff up. And, we still feel, real confident there because, we've won it all the way through. So,
but you've won it because you've had a very good purpose, a very altruistic purpose that really ultimately helps the end user, right? I mean, that's
all honest, right?
Right.
Yeah. And we had good counsel along the way. I got to hand it to counsel, right? And
shout out to counsel.
Yeah, but not only just in terms of the kind of the litigation aspect of that, but good counsel on from our founders and how to operate. And we're a very honest, very transparent. I mean, we used to have our price on the website, until, when we really dug deep on, because of litigation, you get challenged on the validity of your model. They try to disprove it, right? Is it legal? So we spent a bunch of time making sure that all of that and, exactly what we can say. So, but we're a very honest company. We don't, we obsess about our customers. We don't worry about the competition. They're going to be there. We have to keep our eye on the market. But we've got a plan, and we continue to execute on that. And we look for our employees to have experiences when they're running up against competition to come back and say, "Hey, we're struggling with this." And a long time, I learned in my pragmatic marketing training was a great line, right? It's like when somebody gives you their opinion, when a salesperson gives you their opinion, your response is, your opinion, although interesting, is irrelevant, right? Because sales reps deal with the objection. I'm a sales guy, so I can say it.
Yeah.
They're just dealing with what's stopping me at that sale. But we honor that and reward it and recognize it for anything, no matter how big or small. And that's what keeps us on the horizon of innovation and disruption, right? And so we knew our model.
The objections, you actually welcome them, so you can actually.
Absolutely. Well, how do you learn, right? If we don't know what they are, we become complacent, and then and complacency leads to entitlement, and those are two killers, deal breakers. Period. End.
Killer. It's not uncommon, and you know this, but I know this in my own industry, right? PR and crisis management. When you have disruptors, they do go against the behemoths, or they do go against those that have been, had the market share. And litigation is a tool to knock out smaller competitors, right?
Yes.
And so what would you say, besides being very transparent and having good counsel and so forth, like what really helped you get through that? So because companies do experience this, and I think some of them are a bit naive that they're never going to have that happen. Yeah,
I think I can, I'll break it. I think I've got three good reasons, right? One is, help me remember that I said three. The absolute sanctity and honest to goodness truth that we were not in violation or infringing. We just weren't doing it. So we knew we would prevail. Now, oftentimes that may not be the case because litigation can win when,
or the court of public opinion,
or you run out of money trying to prove that you're right.
Right.
And so I think then the next number two was we've got investors that believe in us. We had investors come into the organization when the suits were active. They knew what the risks were, but they knew we were onto something. I was on for 1 hour before I did my first pitch to go raise capital. And my first priority when I came on, like, what do you want to do first? One of my board members were like, you need to go raise a round. I'm making that sound much simpler than it went, but so I had to do a C round, right? We wrapped up some B rounds. What would be a normal process, 6 months-ish, maybe 9 at the most, turned into an 18-month raise. And in the world of fundraising, if you get a failed raise, right, you get a bruise in the market, and a lot of investors don't want to take a look at you, right? And I did over 80 pitches that just didn't met no, and the single number one reason was litigation. But we kept our persistence. We worked in networks, and I gave one of my investors the 12th man award, right? 12th man on the football field, because he was just so involved with being helpful, through the really, growing the company was hard enough, right? Hiring people, but always being limited because I was spending more on litigation than I was spending on the company.
Yeah.
So, and then we had another, large investor come in 2018 who, really believed in what we were doing, and because of their belief and they're ready to throw down and fight, right? And so because of that belief and they liked our profile and they liked the people, right? That's really important. They came in and they renewed our confidence. And so the third leg of that, or number three, is the employees, myself included, right? So it's hard to be in this position. They say it's lonely at the top because a lot of times you don't really have anybody to talk to. That's why I say having a mentor is a key deal, which I do, right? And being a mentor, but it's sometimes when you just get knocked over the head time and time after again, bad news after bad news, and no to this and no to that, and it wears on you, right? And so sometimes that shows up in your mood at work or your personality. And as a leader, right, and as my management team, we work really hard to manage that. And that's, we do that through communication, by the way. And every week in check-ins, you rate on a scale of 1 to 5, how are you feeling? So we're checking your feelings, not your engagement, but how are you feeling? And if somebody's running at a 3 or 4 or 5, and all of a sudden it dips to a 1 or a 2, we're like, hey, what's going on, right? It gives us a chance to get in front of it.
Yeah.
But by that virtue, it not only changed the landscape of renewed our confidence and our vigor, because we knew we were going to make it through, but it changed kind of the personality of the company, because we were now going to say, we know we're going to win this. We're going to get through it, right? And there was a time, the month before the pandemic, we reached the point where we actually had won all the litigation, and we had no pending litigation. Then the pandemic hit, right? So it was
you
was
can't
crazy.
Make this shit up. You just
can't. I know. And by every measure, we shouldn't be here, right? The difficulty. But the
planet Earth for you.
The level, exactly. the level of perseverance, though, by the staff, it's just extraordinary. And so when the pandemic hit, right, we had to make a bunch of changes, right? So we were already lean. We had to get leaner. But we had a really big customer base that we had to maintain and take care of. So, we ended up really, focusing on just taking care of our existing customers. And so, we knew we weren't going to be taking on new customers because the market wasn't going to be there. But surprisingly to us, we sold more devices in the history of the company. To date, we sold more in 1 year than we'd ever sold in all years combined.
And that's been 5 years. So
in 2020. So we had amazing growth, big wins. We've been able to bring a lot of the talent back. It's funny because you talk about, you really want to pay attention to your top talent, because, the 80-20 rule, and I was having a session with my mentor, and he's like, you really got to pay your top 20%. I'm like, the entire company's the top 20%.
No,
right?
we weeded them out.
Yeah, we just went through this, right? So we
have a no
back,
asshole rule,
some of the
so
old
you
top
probably
20%.
weed them out all the time, right?
Yeah, well, so
from the
fortunately,
beginning.
we were pretty lucky that we didn't have, there wasn't a lot to begin with, and
exactly.
we don't have any now. So it's been an incredibly wild ride. Innovation and disruption does not happen overnight. We had a failed market launch attempt. The first product never made it to market. The first iteration, first idea, right? I think disruption it sounds awesome and it's really cool. I'm finally, for the first time, experiencing at a mass scale like this, that when it happens, it's a phenomenal feeling. I've gone through some great firsts, and we've been really successful making some changes, but I was never the CEO of the company when we did it. Even when I was at the insulin dosing CEO there, we couldn't change the hearts and minds. It's impressive to see the staff that I work with rise, right? It's like their point of working is not to go to work. It's they get up and communicate and start, making headway on, what they said they were going to do last week. When we check in, what was my progress against what I said I was going to do last week? Okay, if some people only have one thing they're going to do this week, others have a laundry list of things and only got 3 or 4 of them done. And we stop and check and measure and make sure that those are always the right things, and we pivot immediately if we need to. All the goals and objectives are literally, we set them out quarterly. I set them out annually, but it breaks down to weekly measurements. And it's just been impressive to see such talent, become so cohesive, coalesce I think that's the right word.
Really rise to it. Well, they've had a lot of adversity. I think groups sometimes with a lot of adversity, and they can do better with that challenge because they are such a core group and they have a purpose that
and you have to reward and recognize that, right? So we've got a system where we don't, we tried to stay away from monetary, spot rewards. So we would give out experiences. We work with a company that gives out day at the spa, brewery tour, night at the movies. Yeah, it's pretty cool. And we use a thing called Workplace, which is like a Facebook. It is in fact Facebook for inside, but it's not for work. It's social engagement. It's about putting pictures of your kids.
That's awesome.
But when you do your, it's a company called Bluebird. When you do your Blue Board, part of the requirement is, hey, you got this gift, but you have to share your experience on Workplace. So, and there's a psychology to this, they call it's the afterglow, where people get to relive the experience and then share it with others, and people chime in.
I love that.
And so that, in turn kind of leads to engagement. Now we got into the pandemic, we did a survey, and we're like, hey, can't really do these. What do you guys want? They're like, money. Give us money. Right? So,
of course, right?
But our partner there, they were pretty quick to come up with experiences that were pandemic friendly. And now that we're coming out of it, we're back to, kind of some experiences.
That's awesome.
And so, at the end of the day, though, I think, so that really embodies TACIT, right? Everything we're doing, it's all implied. Like, so a lot of times you're on a conference call and says, does everybody agree with that? Dead silence. And I don't matter what company you're in, that happens everywhere. So we have this kind of standing joke. We, at every meeting when we do our check-ins, the definition of, implicit is it is implied. If silence is, if silence is present, it's implied. So we get a big kick out of when nobody answers. We say, well, it's implicit that everybody just agreed with what I said because nobody disagreed.
Tacit consent.
It's tacit, right? We say, all right, tacit consent. It's exactly what we say. But the idea is that, if we make our employees the highest priority, and then we make our customers the second highest priority, it all works really, really well. And we give our employees a universe to work in. Now, what do we struggle with, right? We struggle with rest, time off, capacity, utilization, all of the things that can lead to burnout. And, in a hot job market that is now, right? Highest number of resignations in April, we're at risk for people who, that are, pushing burnout. So we're paying really close attention to this. And we had our second survey in a row, still highly engaged, or what we're called extremely engaged. We had one survey that we dropped from extremely to highly, and it was right after we made the changes in the pandemic. So we expected that, but we still stayed highly. But our measurement on rest got worse even after we put a plan in to address it, right? So we're going to have to get rid of it. Um, because we're really lean and we're really busy. We're super busy. We've got, #1 health system in the world as a customer. We've got the largest independent cardiology practice, and we have hundreds of customers. And we've got a lot of customers in the ambulatory space, and they're owners of their practices, and it's their money, and it doesn't matter if it's $10 or $1 million. It
doesn't.
You better be there, right? And it better work. And so everybody's over capacity. And so we learned a really valuable lesson, during the pandemic. It was how to run lean. And what that ended up doing was improving a lot of our benchmark numbers because of reduction in expenses and growth on the top side. And the revenue stayed really strong, and our days of collection, what we thought would take longer, we actually got faster at it. All sorts of, so by all the benchmarks of a SaaS-based company, we improved dramatically, and we moved way out into the right, unicorn status in some benchmarks. So board got used to that, investors got used to that, and so we're trying to balance the shareholder value of how do you balance that? So we're being judicious about how we recapitalize the capacity to offset some of that. And so we're gonna, I think we're thinking very creatively about how we do that. And we're enlisting the employees to solve the problem with us.
Oh, that's
great. I think that's one of the things where we consistently get, and this is the management team, not just me, where we consistently have our strength. One of our biggest strengths is leadership integrity and leadership availability. And the AI of our surveys weights the importance of all these different things that we measure individually every survey. And that always comes up as a very heavy weight and shows up as a strength. So we know we've got a good ability to manage, and we've got really transparent and communicative and employees that feel safe about being in an environment where they can voice their opinions. We actually have a way for people to do it completely anonymous. We have another system if you don't want to use the surveys.
But it doesn't seem like your employees do that. It seems like they're very fully transparent.
It's funny, because we get these anonymous, hey, somebody was doing whatever, and we make, we always have a process now. We respond, and then somebody will email and go, hey, that was me. So we're like, it was supposed to be anonymous, right? So, but it lends to the trust, right?
Yeah,
they're not afraid to do that, right?
Yeah, no, it's good. And what's on the horizon for you guys? How does the future look?
Yeah, the future is bright, right? I almost want to say I got to wear shades, but I won't do it. Oops, I said it. So, there's right now for us, it's what do we say no to, right? It's not what we say yes to. We've got there's been a lot of consolidation, a lot of acquisition activity. The first 90 days of the year is almost $4 billion in acquisitions just in our space. There's been some more recent activity of folks on one other end of the market moving into our space called the diagnostics. So we know that there's great opportunity for us if people like that are interested. We're really focused on execution right now. We've got a full plate. We've got a plan. We're going to stick to that. And but with the time warp that we went through, right? It just fast forwarded. Now, what happened was the kind of the nascent market of telehealth has, that's an umbrella really and so you have things, called RPM, or remote patient monitoring. These are like vital signs. This is your scale, your blood pressure cuff, your SpO2 monitor for your blood oxygen. And then you've got more virtual care, which is care management. How do I get you registered? How do I get you connected to a doctor? How do I manage reporting? How do I communicate with you? And then you've got diagnostics, where you've got to get people in to do their tests. You're doing tests remotely in their home. Phones now are becoming medical devices because you can use computer vision for urine analysis, take a picture of your stick, and boom, you've got a diagnostic test. I mean, it's pretty impressive. Blood work, things like that. So there's all of these kind of what I'll call them tangential markets. And so we kind of fit under that, telehealth umbrella.
Yeah.
We're a diagnostic tool that kind of runs remote patient monitoring to virtual care. So, the way that market is today is that it's taking shape in terms of what they call the hospital without walls, or a hospital at home. So CMS came out with this thing called hospital without walls, or HWOW. And what they've done is they've already established a certain number of criteria that a patient has to meet in order to become qualified or registered as a patient to be treated in their home, or a patient in the home, or a hospital at home. And there are certain protocols you have to go through, and there's different grades in terms of acuity, meaning levels of severity, from low acuity to high acuity. And most of the stuff they're doing now is kind of the bigger stuff: lung disease, some heart attacks, some heart disease stuff, as well as some other things. There's over 100 hospitals that have adopted this, 20 to 30 health systems that have adopted this in roughly half the US number of states. So this is a real thing. The Mayo Clinic and Kaiser both jointly put $100 million into a company called Medically Home. This is a company that's focusing on acute care, which is a hospital is what they call an acute care setting. So they're looking at creating the hospital at home. And then there's a number of payers that are looking at how to deal with hospital at home, because this is how it'll go. And so when you look at a hospital, it all works really well because you've got a radiology department, a cardiology department, a psychology department, a laboratory, a pharmacy, and then you've got your EMR that kind of connects it all together. But that doesn't exist in the home. So how do you do cardiology, radiology, behavioral health?
Yeah, how do you do that
care
virtually
management,
and make it a hospital virtually?
Right, and right now it's hundreds of different companies all vying for a little piece of what they do.
Right.
And health systems are trying to standardize on this, that, or the other. So we look at it that less about the technology, and we start to look more at the treatment, because where accountable care organization is, where value-based care is going, where what's called bundled payments, where they'll say, look, we're not going to do fee for service. You're not going to do this test and get reimbursed. You're going to get so much money for treating these conditions, and you get a bundle of money, and you can do what you want with it. But you run out of money, that's it. You figure out how to do it. So
this is the way it's going.
This is the way it's going. Yeah, this train has left the station, and so.
And where do you guys fit in with all this?
Yeah, so
the diagnostic part, right?
Yeah, so in the hospital, you have the ICU where you have a bunch of really high-end monitors, very expensive, and they're doing what we call real-time telemetry. And telemetry is just a term for wireless communication. You can do it in consumer electronics telemetry. Your house is actually telemetry with your Wi-Fi. So, but we're doing more medical. So there's a high acuity or continuous or real-time telemetry where people in the ICU, very sick, somebody's sitting at the desk, watching all the heartbeats go by, calling the doctor's meeting when there's an emergency, et cetera.
And these guys are still in the home.
That's in the hospital. We're still in the home.
In the hospital. Okay.
But in the hospital, then you get down, like if you get discharged out of the ICU, you go to kind of a periodic monitor. So it's a little thing that rolls around on the cart. They come in, take your blood pressure, take your temperature, do your respirations. They write it down in their hand, right? I work for a company. We automated that. Of
course you did.
But in the home, those kinds of departments don't exist, right? So it's very common, like in a radiology department, you might have they call it a 3T magnet and a 1T, and these are just the power of the magnets. So not all your patients need a 3T. Some of them need a 1T. If you're a pregnant mom, you get you get a ultrasound, quite often. And then one time you go in and you might get a 3D. It might be a different machine. Not all your machines have 3D, right? And so we know that the hospital environment has to coalesce somehow in the home, these departments. And we know that our device, although interesting, is irrelevant. Come back to my saying, devices are going to change, right? So they're going to get smaller. We're already injecting them. We're going to eat them. We're going to swallow them. There's a thing called transesophageal where you swallow a little thing and it goes down your heart, and you do a little ultrasound from the inside of your esophagus, pull it back out. So this stuff, that's just going to happen, right? And so, we're not banking on the device, although you always have to have an acquisition device, because where else are you going to get the data? We're banking on the back end, the platform, right? So, and the idea of an agnostic platform for device connectivity in the home, where you're looking at your vitals, your blood pressure, your SpO2, you're looking for some level of ECG that maybe not diagnostic, but it's indicative of things. to diagnostic ECG, to respiratory, spirometry, plethora of things, right?
This is decades to come. I mean, this is like decades worth of work. I mean, it's already here, but it's moving. Like,
yeah, and the only thing that made it possible right now was the pandemic, and it's sad because of what happened because of the pandemic, and I rue the next day when the next one comes, but I'm sure we'll see one in our lifetimes. But the way it drove adoption for physicians to adopt, the way it drove the government to change policy, and the way it forced healthcare providers, the venture arms. There's a lot of healthcare companies that have venture arms that spend a lot of money in innovation trying to improve care. And that, like you said, fast forwarded as 10 years. And so it is here and now. And so right now it's a system of systems. We're starting to see the consolidation in our verticals, right? From what we call screening, cardiac screening, like your Apple Watch tells you got a problem, to diagnostics, to therapeutics, where, hey, I'm either going to put you on some medication or I'm going to stick something in your body and
which is the treatment part, right?
Right, exactly. And then that's long-term treatment. When you get something implanted, that's there for a long time.
All eventually going to go on this one platform or a platform or
platforms,
right?
I think you're going to have probably multiple vendors that will have those platforms, but I think it's going to consolidate, right? There's hundreds of companies in the radiology world. It used to be 100 companies. Now there's 5 really big ones.
Well, this will be a time machine. So looking back, looking from 10 years from now or 20 years from now, they're going to look back at their podcast and they're going to say, Stuart Long was spot on, right?
Yeah, well, I hope so. And I say this, with humility. One of the tenets that I've kind of grown into is the ability to see the future. And it's come from a lot of bad or failures, right? Because of making the wrong assumptions, thinking things were going to go a particular way. And I would have been wrong about this, had we not gone through a pandemic. I would have said, we're not going down this path. We're going to go in fact, we're going on a different path.
Wow.
But we're able to be nimble and flexible. And because of the changing market conditions and the fact that we're already this very high quality device doing telemetry, and the demand for always on at the consumer level, because my watch is always sending data, right? And now there's all sorts of body sensors you can wear, and I've always had a heart rate monitor to go exercise with, that kind of stuff. The demand for that means the old style way of doing things, of wearing it for 2 weeks or 30 days and mailing it in, the consumers won't even accept it.
No, they won't even accept it
in a world of always on, right? And so I'm certain this is going to happen. And what we want to do is, where a lot of companies are going and creating smaller, easier patches to wear, one lead, lower fidelity, good for certain things, what we call a low acuity market. Just like in your hospital, you have a high acuity ICU and a low acuity med surg environment where you have these rolling around monitors. It's that same concept. And so, we're going to lean the other direction. We're going to go more high acuity. We want to throw more leads at it. We want to throw more wires at it. We want to treat the really sick people, because that day is coming when that's going to happen, when the hospital at home really catches fire. And it couldn't happen without the physician adoption, and it couldn't happen without the government putting the mechanics in place to enable that. Those two in combination.
The other point. So it is a trifecta, right?
It is, yeah. And if you look back in time, all the way back to the beginning of Medicare, the things that has changed healthcare is incentives or disincentives. And then the ability for physicians to adopt those incentives or disincentives. A lot of major companies, Microsoft has come at this market. A lot of companies have come in, big companies say they're going to come in and change it,
right?
And nobody has. A lot of conglomerates got together, tried to come in and try to change it. But our so we got a market force that works, and then we just put all the control into the hands of the world's #1 healthcare system, and they got their hands on it. They've got those relationships with all those payers. They've got all those relationships with all in fact, they have the 3rd largest clinical laboratory behind Quest and LabCorp in the US.
I did not know that.
They're already in a large amount of facilities throughout the US already. So the ability for a provider to have already established that model and then go to market with us to establish that model again, we feel really good about the kind of what we're talking about, is that this is going to happen. And we feel just blessed to be here. I think, by hook or crook or a whole lot of luck, and a bunch of perseverance
a lot
and
of
resilience,
work and perseverance.
By the way. Yeah. And resilience. It was funny. I got asked once, I was being interviewed by a Swedish company. And it was a great interview because they're more interested in kind of you personally. Right. And so they were asking all sorts of fun questions, and they asked me to describe myself in one word. And I fumbled the question.
What did you say?
I can't even remember what I said, but I remember going home and talking about it at home. And they're like, "Oh, I know what that is. You're resilient." And I was like, that's true. And so I think that's what's allowed us to persevere in the market through the pandemic. And I give that as the hallmark of the company, not just me, because the group of people that we're working with, it's one of the most resilient group of people that I've ever seen in my entire life. Their ability to stay level-headed and not get overly excited through some seriously tumultuous times has just been nothing short of amazing. And I'm just honored to be in their presence.
That's awesome. Well, it couldn't happen to a better company. It couldn't happen to a better CEO.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
So I want you to tell me something a little bit about you. Like, who the hell are you? Like, where did you come from? What planet, right? Yeah. Like, what do you do outside of the, like this, just like, it seems like you're totally like immersed in this, but you have a passion outside of this. You've been different from day one. Like, who are you?
Yeah.
What about little Stuart?
Yeah. Well, funny enough, Little Stuart was my favorite book growing up. Believe it or not.
Really?
Because everybody kept giving me the book, giving it to my parents. When you're old enough, you'll read this. I finally read it, and I was actually attached to it. So it's really special now to watch the movie. So it's funny. I was in high school. I was kind of a late bloomer, and so all my friends, they were all bigger on the football team. They all had a car. I didn't have a car. My parents wouldn't get me unless I had to buy my own car. So I kind of, I learned, I'll just say that the gift of the gab. I was the one who never got in trouble, even though I was totally involved in the trouble. And my principal way back in the day was like, he's like, how are you not involved in what is going on here? And I'm like,
I was the catalyst. I was the instigator. No one knew it was me.
Yeah. And we got, interviewed by this company came in, and I was a junior, I think, in high school, and they were going to hire. So they selected a bunch of us to go in, and they ended up asking me to go to work for them. And all my friends were like, how are you? I'm like, the little guy, he's the runt, right?
It pays to be the little guy. It pays to be the nerd, right?
I realized that and I asked them, I'm like, well, why me? And they're like, well, you seemed like you were really listening. And I remembered at the time that I nod my head and I would be doing this, the whole thing. And I realized the value of listening. Right. And so I've always been, kind of a bit of a talker. Right. And I never quite agreed. My grandfather was a minister, and I would sit in church and listen to him go, man, none of that makes any sense to me. The women are supposed to stay home and cook, and what? My mom works, right? That doesn't make any sense.
Okay, not only have you been a disruptor, but you're irreverent.
Right. Yes, and so but I've never wavered from altruism. I believe that there is a higher power that that exists. I believe that's what keeps us humble, helps us preserve our self-pity and resentment and things like that. And I know those are things that I watch out for, just as a human. So I studied kind of the human psyche, and that's why I think I liked sales so much, and why I like doing the job that I do, because I get to be really broad. But kind of what makes me is I'm enormously driven. And whether it's being a great father or a great husband or a really good friend, or the guy with the best lawn on the street,
Do you have the best lawn on the street?
No, and I'm struggling right now because it's really irritating. So, but it's looking good though.
Okay.
I'll send pictures. So, but kind of where my passions lie, right? So I've been running for over 30 years. I'll never forget my first run. I went out and ran 2 miles in the dead of winter. And I came back and thought, oh my God, I'm never going to do that. And I was in high school, played sports, and I did stuff like that. And never tried to run any long distance. So in long story short, I got way into triathlons and marathons and all this kind of good stuff. And ultimately I got into mountaineering and ice climbing. So one of my big passions is ice climbing. And
I did not know this.
Yeah. So there's
You're like a freak of nature.
There's a really good book about climbing, and it changed my life about life in general. And it's like advice I've given my kids when they're having a tough time. And when you climb, you're only looking for your next hold. And, and with an ice axe in your hand, you've got to be pretty particular about where you put it. And so you're not thinking about where you just came from, and you're definitely not thinking about the top, right? Because you're missing, you can't miss in the middle, right? And so it's the thing that allows you to stay very present, right? Living very much in the moment. And so that I enjoy it because it causes that for me to be that way. And then I translate that into
in present time, because if you don't, man, present. You're dead.
Yes. And I've got some great video of stuff that I do, and then I go back and watch it. And I'm thinking, what was I thinking doing that right in the moment? But I absolutely love it. But what I love more than that, it's funny. I told my wife, when we met, I said, hey, someday I'm going to learn to play the guitar, and I want to take up photography. Those are two things I'm going to do. Just FYI, when I do it, give me the space. I gave up on the guitar. I can't do it.
Okay.
Not only can I not play the guitar,
inclined.
I can't sing and play the guitar at the same time. And I just can't sing either. So I learned the introduction to Hotel California, which was great. Just played it over and over again, because that's a good song.
You can do that at parties.
So I took up photography in 2015, and I know what I'm going to do when I retire. It has absolutely consumed me. It's my therapy. And I finally decided, after, what was it now, 5 years of work and more than 10,000 hours in the process of processing images, Photoshop, things like that. I decided to test some of my work, and there's three to four pretty big photography. It's kind of the Tonys and the Oscars of the photography world. There's a site that publishes less than 1% of the submissions. I've now got 9 awards and publications.
9.
There. I won as what they call a nominee. So I was like an honorable mention for the Fine Art Photography Awards for 2021 in the category of architecture. That's one of my go-to styles, architecture. And then I also won as commended in the what's called the Siena Creative Photography Awards, because I specialize in fine art, black and white, long exposure, architecture, photography. It's quite a mouthful. So it's architecture
too, right?
Yeah, it's architecture with the use of long exposure to blend skies and water. And then I spend a great deal of time working in black and white to create a piece of art that's representative of something that I want to try to represent. And I did a picture for New York City as a series, and the New York City photo won. It was titled Rise, because New York City, to me, a great city, has an incredible ability to just rise above, terrorism, pandemic, thing after thing. And there was a couple other photos, but that one I'm pretty proud of it. So
that's awesome.
I absolutely love it. And if I've got a break, if anytime during the month, I'm out shooting. So
no TV for you.
Oh, I sneak a little bit in, when everybody's in bed,
How does he have time to do
that?
Okay,
Yeah. When everybody's in bed, it's really late.
Photography.
Yeah, it's really late at night, like 7:45 p.m. I'm asleep by 8 o'clock. I get up really early though. So.
That's good though. So tell the listeners how they can connect with you, how they can find you.
Yeah, I'm hard to find, actually. I'm a little bit of an extrovert that craves introversion, right? So if you try to find me on Facebook, you won't get much. You'll get my profile picture and my header. You can certainly find me on Facebook, but you can certainly find me on our website, infobionic.com. My email is my first name and my last name separated by the period, Stuart.Long at infobionic.com. And then I'm on LinkedIn. So you just search for Stuart Long on LinkedIn. That's where I am.
Okay, good. Awesome. So we know how people can get a hold of you. We know that you're this crazy CEO that doesn't like assholes in the environment, does rock climbs, does photography, and is on a disruption path for the next, I don't know, how long are you going to be at this? 10, 20, 30 years?
I don't know that I'll stop, because if I retire and go into photography, I'm sure there's some disruption that needs to happen there.
Yes, let's work on that.
Yeah. So, and art is art, right? There's it's what's interesting is what I've noticed about photography. Kind of models in the streets or things like that. Very, very popular, but now everybody's like So it's, so I'm sure there, that's enough, I think, to kind of probably keep me busy, but, I don't think I'll ever stop disrupting, whether it's, changing how I mow my lawn or care for my kids, or
I don't think you will either. I do want pictures of the lawn though.
Okay.
We might even post it on this podcast.
It's funny. I actually signed up with a lawn SaaS company.
Oh, of course.
For my lawn care, and they keep sending me emails. Send us a picture of your lawn, because I've got their first couple of treatments in.
Okay,
so I actually just took pictures of my lawn.
Okay, I want to see it for sure. We'll put it on the podcast. Stuart, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And
you're welcome. Thank you, by the way.
Yes, you're very welcome. And listen, everybody, if you learned something today, or even if you laughed, tell someone about the podcast. And we thank very much for Stuart Long being on. And I will say this, thank you for listening to the Disruption Interruption podcast, where we talk to leaders that transform lives, change consumer behavior, alter economics, and never accept the status quo. Ciao for now. Because we live in a highly litigious society, with America being one of the top litigious countries in the world, here's our legal disclaimer. This information is not intended to be a substitute for professional public relations or legal advice. Do not disregard seeking professional, legal, healthcare, or financial advice, or delay seeking professional PR or legal advice because of something you have heard here. Contact an attorney to obtain advice on any particular legal situation or problem. Use of this podcast or our website or any of its social media or email links do not create an agency-client relationship between Johto PR and the user.